I was vocal in protecting the right of the delegates, to boo, to cheer, to do what they feel is necessary, because there were a lot of grievances with Governor Cox.
Yeah.
There still is. But strategy-wise, that is not the right strategy as delegates that we should be taking, booing our governor off the stage.
From the Blue Form Media Studios, this is the 435 Podcast, the pulse of Southern Utah.
If you're looking for a nice cup of coffee and you're in downtown St. George, FS Coffee Co., that's where you're going to want to stop. It's right there on the corner of Tabernacle and Main Street in downtown St. George. So if you got a bicycle, ride it on down there and grab a drip coffee and tell them the 435 guys sent you. How does it feel to be the Queen RINO? You've been crowned. You've been crowned the queen of the RINOs.
I'm really having this identity crisis because it's like overnight I went from the extreme right-wing conspiracy theorist to a Satan worshiping establishment RINO.
Yeah,
that's right. You are Satan worshiping. According to the Facebook.
It's the craziest thing. It's so crazy how fast
hilarious
narrative and like sentiment just swings in just like a brief moment over a singular election.
Yeah, it's not. Are we going right now, by the way?
Let's go. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, are we?
So,
yeah, we were talking about that the other day. Like, it's interesting that, I guess politicians, but just any, whether you're a city council person, the president, whatever, like one singular deal can make people think that you're like totally crazy.
But it's not, this is the most frustrating thing, is that one single deal can change the conversation around that individual. So it's not like people all of a sudden start believing this. Like nobody actually believes that. But it's this, it's in the game, in the election race, there's these things that you say in order to try to sway opinion of a really small group of individuals for the delegate race, right? Because the state delegates, I think there's only like 800 state delegates.
Oh, no, there's 4,000.
4,000 state delegates, right?
Yep.
And then
2,600 showed up, but there's 4,000 state delegates.
Only 2,600 showed up, huh?
Yes. So a low percentage showed up, which actually would have likely favored Lyman over Axson having a smaller number show up. But obviously we know Axson still won. But you're right. It's the branding that people try to do heavily during an election cycle. And I think people lose sight of the Ronald Reagan approach of, hey, if someone agrees with me 80% of the time, they're my friend, not my 20% enemy, right? And so that was really eye-opening for me just to see firsthand now how, wow, like without even having a conversation with me, that most of these people have my phone number. Like they can easily contact me if they want to know all of my reasons for supporting Rob Axson over Phil Lyman, right? Like it's not a secret. I'm an open book. I'm happy to talk to anyone, right? And I put a lot of it out there on social media too. But instead, it's so much easier, and especially if people aren't truly seeking the truth or truly seeking to build and have positive progress, if their motivation is actually more just to have an audience and their own personal agenda versus truth, it's a lot easier just to throw out these derogatory terms of labeling people.
Well, because then
RINOs or establishment.
But then it catches momentum, right? And then all of a sudden there's a pile-on effect where everybody piles in.
A mob mentality.
Exactly. And that's what that's what triggers the thread online, and everybody piles into that. And so when we think about these individual, races watching, because it makes me feel nervous about the caucus system, right? I had Willie Billings on just a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about how do we improve the delegate process and the caucus system.
Yeah, we talked about SB 54 a little bit.
Yeah, and this is where it seemed like the far right was attacking Axson for not doing enough against SB 54. What's your perspective on that? How did that just not hold water for you? And maybe it did hold water for you, but it wasn't the determining factor on supporting Rob over Phil.
So my motivation is truly always to seek the truth. And I will stand with whoever's doing the right thing, regardless of what side they're on, right? And so I try not to, and we can all be guilty of this at times, but I try not to fall into that tribalism of, oh, this fits my bias, so I'm just going to go here and believe everything this side says.
Yeah.
Because what so often people don't realize on both sides is they're doing the exact same thing. They want to criticize this side for putting out all of this false information and fake news. It happens every bit as much on the right as it does on the left.
No, I always say the extreme 1% on the right and the left are the same people.
They are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two sides.
Yep. Two sides of the same coin, for sure.
They just want to blow everything up.
Yeah.
Well,
Pretty much.
They just want to see the world burn.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's not also it, right? I think there's individual topics, there's individual issues, because the vast majority of Americans, this is even outside of the Republican Party, are like single item voters, right? Because of this one thing, that's why I'm going to vote this direction, when it's way more nuanced than that. And then as a politician, you have to figure out, okay, what are those one issue items that the biggest portion of people are voting on, and then appeal to that base, right? I can't help but think like how Trump operates in this way, right? Is that he's picked the things that are the biggest single issue items for individuals, and then he plays to those pieces. Where as you get closer to local government, those individual issues become so much more difficult to manage, because you have a smaller pool of individuals that actually end up voting, right? But we're trying to play the same politics that Trump's playing at the national stage, at the local and the state level, and it doesn't always play out the same way as the way he's playing it, because these single issues get blown up. Do you think the SB 54 was the single issue that Phil was running on and that was highlighted?
The single issue that it appeared that camp was running on is their attempt to mimic and mirror the election, the convention between Lyman versus Caucus.
Yeah.
Because we all know Caucus is not popular amongst the delegates, and Lyman won by nearly 68% against Spencer Cox. And so campaign strategy wise, if I'm in their shoes, I'm assuming they're probably thinking, hey,
we're going to run the same strategy.
If we can paint Rob as Cox, which is absolutely false.
Right.
Rob is not Cox. But if they can do that, then they can attempt to mirror those results. Thankfully, it didn't happen that way. A lot of us saw through. It was close, but a lot of us saw through that Rob is not Cox. And many of us who supported Lyman for governor, I was a loud supporter for Lyman up through the primary election, because I'm very disenfranchised at a lot of the decisions and policies that Spencer Cox has done, and felt that we needed a change there. Now, just because I saw that we needed that change doesn't mean that I'm now going to support every single thing that Phil Lyman does. And he's made a lot of decisions and game calls that I don't agree with, like extreme lapses in judgment, in my opinion. And so it's okay for us to be able to look at the facts and realize that, hey, I'm going to support a different candidate. And, strategy wise, in terms of SB 54, I actually do really care about repealing that process, because I do think the caucus convention system, while it does have flaws, I think it's funny when people call it this pure system. There's absolutely room for corruption in the caucus convention system.
Politics here,
we're talking politics. Yeah. So I understand, honestly, why SB 54 came about. I get it. But in terms of which is superior, I like the fact that the caucus convention system gives a greater ability for someone off the street, a grassroots candidate like you and I, to be able to go in and have a greater chance without having the millions of dollars funding us. It gives us a greater potential to get people like that into public office. And I like that about the caucus convention system. So with that, my opinion was, if Phil Lyman would have been in, because of the multiple lapses in judgment that I've seen from the past and the bridges that have been burned there. I mean, really, in terms of any working relationship with the legislator or the executive branch, which you need to have those things when you are the chair of the Republican Party, it's simply not there with Lyman. Therefore, Rob, who has actually taken some very meaningful steps to preserve the caucus convention system, he is the first chair since SB 54 was implemented 10 years ago to actually change bylaws to fund our convention nominees. Nearly $250,000 went to our convention winners. 30 out of 34 of those convention winners went on to win their primary.
Yeah, that was actually what I was just thinking in my head. I was like, I can't remember the number somebody had posted about how many of the convention winners actually went on to win their races and win their primaries.
The vast majority, almost 89%.
Is that typical though?
So I don't know. I haven't looked back at past percentages. I've been involved in caucus since 2020 was really when I first realized the need to get involved. But I do know that Rob has done more for the caucus convention system than any other chair since the implementation of SB 54. And I also know that we do have some strategies going on to help repeal that process that had Lyman got in, I think those would have been off the table.
Well, and I think it's interesting to me because when I had Governor Cox on and I talked about his convention speech, right? And
I didn't see this episode. Oh my gosh. I need to go back and see this.
I waited to the end. I waited to the end to talk about that one because I didn't want him to, I wanted him to feel comfortable. And I did want to ask him a few tougher questions just to get his take on it. But he even says, he's like, I regretted saying it in the way that I did. I was like, well, because I actually found it hilarious. I found it hilarious because he comes in knowing that he wasn't going to compete. He had chosen not to compete in that avenue. And so when he got up there, he said his piece. He said, this is where I see there's problems with the convention system. And I couldn't disagree with him. And then seeing what played out, right? I'm like, well, the radical right, this is where if this had gone the other way and Phil wins, it's just giving more fodder to that feeling that the convention system doesn't represent the broad base of the Republican Party throughout the state. And because of that narrative, that campaign strategy that they took against Rob, it was let's run the same playbook we did against Cox rather than actually put what's Phil's record versus Rob's record and then really put it out there. And that's how the narratives can get spun. And that's where the trust erodes, right? If I'm a casual, which truthfully I would say I'm like a casual observer of it. I do my best to keep up all the time, but I also have a bazillion other things going on, right? So if I was retired and this is all that I was doing was following politics, then or if I got paid to do this, right? If that was the case, I'd probably pay attention a little bit tighter. But from the casual observer, I'm looking at the infighting that's happening. I'm like, I don't trust this system. I wouldn't trust this system. And some of the delegates that are out there and saying the things that they're saying, it erodes the trust in it. And when I was talking to Willie, his strategy at the Washington County level is we have to bring the trust back into that caucus system, right? We have to be able to educate the local population to where they vote for delegates that they actually believe represent them, and then allow those delegates to go put forth what they believe. And when we see these arguments being played out, it erodes that convention system. So I think it's good that Rob won because I think he does represent a broader base of the Republican Party.
Yes.
But one thing I talked about is with Cox, going back to what he was saying, he's like, I spent so much time over the last couple of election cycles trying to bridge the gap between the left and the right. He said, I haven't put enough attention on the right and the right. And it's something that he has said that he wants to change. Whether he does that or not, at the end of the day, that's what's going to get him elected, is that left to right is playing that middle moderate level, because Salt Lake has such a big voting base and he's right there in the thick of the blue dot. And so I can see how it's going to be a struggle for him to bridge the right and the right. But I think Rob has a better opportunity to bridge that right and the right than...
Well, yeah, because Rob is a true conservative.
Yeah.
Anyone who looks at his actual track record and experience, he is a true conservative. So this false narrative that was made to paint him, in this exact same category as Governor Cox was simply just a false narrative. But I'm going to actually have to go back and watch your episode with Governor Cox, because I was a vocal critic of his when it came to his convention speech, that broad brush of labeling all of us delegates who were there all day long until midnight, as these extremists. And so I'm glad to hear that he regretted using that terminology, because now actually
he said he had two speeches. He said he had two speeches.
Yeah, he threw out one.
And then he's like, nope. Because of that, the energy in the room when he got up, you could tell. Yeah. He was like, and he's always been a fighter. Like, he's never been one to just back down from an argument. Like, he's always been a fighter, which is why he is in the position that he is.
He's got a lot of energy.
He has a lot of energy. And so, I could see how he was like, okay, I'm going to go this way or this way, feel the room. And you could feel that energy go. And he's like, I'm just going to fight this one out. And he says he regrets doing that. So it's interesting in politics. You get sucked into those moments.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, I did not boo because I don't think that that's, the right venue to do that. However, I was vocal in protecting the right of the delegates, to boo, to cheer, to do what they feel is necessary, because there were a lot of grievances with Governor Cox. Yeah. There still is. But strategy wise, that is not the right strategy as delegates that we should be taking, booing our governor off the stage. Like, it's just not. It's not going to get us anywhere. And I've learned a lot over these last 4 years of being involved in politics. And that's one thing that I've really come to appreciate and understand. And looking back, I'm kind of mortified at even looking at some of my own past behavior of falling into that trap of labeling people and boxing them into certain categories that just simply weren't fair. Sometimes it's effective, but overall, it's really not, because I think more people, especially here in Utah, are drawn to positivity, are drawn to light. Yes, we can still be truthful, even if it's, sometimes hard truths, but it's learning to do it in a way that brings people in and doesn't shut people out. Yeah. And so it's been a learning experience for me to recognize and reflect inward of, I never want to be like that again or treat people in that way again. And if we truly care about moving the ball forward in a positive direction, we have to be able to work with people that we disagree with. We have to be able to have that trust to do that. It's just, if we're constantly yelling from the sidelines, what does that actually accomplish? Nothing.
There's a couple different ways we can go through this. I want to know what specifically maybe you've said or done strategy-wise, but less important, I would say, moving forward, I've always called, 4D chess, right? Now, I've heard this conversation about Trump all the time, but really when it comes to the political landscape and managing government, even at the local and the state level, is that coalition building, and this was actually the center point of the conversation I want to have with Governor Cox. So we went through a book that he recommended by Yuval Levine, and it talks about the founding fathers and like, how do you get back to the Constitution? His basically the premise of the book is the Constitution can save us. We have to go back to the Constitution. And he points out the Wilsonian generation of the bureaucratic state and the erosion of legislative powers and giving more to the executive branch. And he talks about how we have to balance that out. He takes issue with the 435 members of Congress, how we've limited, this smaller group of individuals based off population size. He thinks we should add seats to it, which has lots of different unintended consequences that he doesn't quite address in the book, but he dives deep into it. And it's one Cox wrote a foreword to. So he was along the way with writing this book. And so I'm thinking of Cox as this, liberal RINO that everybody calls him. And then he's like adamant about how like, no, the Constitution can save us. And at the state level, there's more nuance there. There's the federal government, and then the state level, there's far more nuance. He has to represent, as the executive, 100% of Utah. He can't just represent the Republicans. He's got to represent the Republicans and the Democrats and help try to lead that all together as one. And it's difficult for an executive to do that. It's much easier as a legislator to do that because they just have to represent their small group of individuals that elected them in, which are typically just one side of the aisle. But as a governor, I think he's done, and honestly, I got to tip my hat to him, is that he's made some decisions that I think are poor decisions, pandering to the left. But overall, I think he's appealed to the right, at least the middle right, in a way that's kept him really popular across the state, right? And so thinking of you individually, that complexity at the city council level, like, have you learned that collaboration, it's far more gray than it is black and white? Or do you feel like you have to represent this right side of the aisle, then Danielle's over here on the left side, right? And then, because I actually I love that, right? And I got a lot of heat for honestly, like, being in both of your camps. It's like, how could you be in both their camps? It's like, because the city council, we need to have we got to have a diverse group of council members. That I want Danielle to argue with Michelle Tanner, because without Danielle, there's no one to balance out Michelle, and then it's vice versa, right? Is that nobody's going to balance out Danielle without a Michelle Tanner. Like, I really like that dynamic at the city council level, and then I get a bunch of heat being like, oh, well, you're a RINO, or you're not conservative.
You're an extremist.
It's like, well, I guess, but I think there's a lot of building that can happen in those moments. Do you agree with that?
Well, and yes, and a couple of things on that. Quick thought on Spencer Cox. Mm-hmm. What I really want to see from him still is, I would just love to see an apology, because we all make mistakes. Mm-hmm. And by apology, I'm reverting back to COVID, because that's my hot button issue still, because that's what made me enter politics and feel like I had to protect my children's freedom and liberty, was going back to the mask mandates, going back to...
Well, you basically got fired, right?
Well, yeah. So both Spencer Cox and Deidre vocally said that they supported businesses mandating the COVID shot onto their employees.
Right.
So here's myself as the breadwinner, working mom of my family, breastfeeding a baby at the time. Shots have not even been tested in that group. I've already had COVID.
In the medical field.
I'm a nurse practitioner in the emergency department, and you are going to go out and encourage my employer to say that I can't provide for my family without getting this experimental shot that at the time already had data showing that it was potentially dangerous.
And not effective.
And not effective. Did not stop the spread, did not stop contraction. And you are going to go out on record telling employers to do that to Utahns. Mm. I want an apology for that.
Yeah.
And call it petty, call it what it is. I will say he does not live rent free in my brain, though, like some of these people. I mean, it just blows my mind how many people just cannot stop talking about him. I'm like, does he really keep you up at night? Because I'm really not that worried about Spencer Cox. Like, I've moved on. But anyway, it just, as you were talking about, kind of giving him praise, and I'm not saying he hasn't done some good things. But I think this is a good point for, if he's serious about bridging the gap between, or bridging the right from the right, there is a good way to do it to where it doesn't really abandon his left base, right? It doesn't do that, because I think at this stage...
Because the left base knows now, right? Yeah, well, mask mandates and the shot.
There's a small percentage of them, but they're all going to hide from it, right? Because that erodes their coalition that they built.
To that point, though, it's in the back of their heads, they're going to know, and it's not going to, it's not going to alleviate their support of him.
Yeah, it's not going to abandon that base for him. Right. It could be a small step in that direction, right. But even in trying to get him down here, and this isn't from him or anybody representing him, but people that know him individually, is that he'd like to come down to St. George and come to a place to where there's like actual constructive conversation. So every time he comes down, though, he's like he gets hammered every time he comes down.
So he did that, though, I'm calling it his apology tour, even though I wasn't invited to this, but he did this during the election. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be friends with one of the people who helped organize the location and the event when he came down here during the election. And she specifically told his team, hey, I think you should have Michelle Tanner there. And I can be respectful. It's like, I can some ways sympathize with him now that I've seen that firsthand, some of the vitriol and I feel bad that he's experienced some of that, truly. But also it's like, I feel like I'm a reasonable person and I'm willing to work with anyone, regardless of how much we disagree on issues. And I really wanted that opportunity to be able to sit down and talk to him about some of these things and things we can do moving forward. But his team would not allow me to be there. I've even reached out to, his chief of staff, his scheduler since then, and said, I'd love an opportunity to meet. And it's just never happened. So, Hey, I welcome that opportunity, because although him and I, obviously don't align on everything, and I've probably have been one of the top 5 vocal people in the state of Utah on pointing out some of my frustrations. I've kind of moved on in some ways. I'm not going to dwell on things, but anyway, I just think that
there's new battles. There's always going to be new battles.
There's always
ahead.
New battles and things we need to focus on. And here at the city level, I mean, that's my role here on the city council. Back to your question is, absolutely, we have to work together. We have a 5-member council, And me as a single member, I can be super passionate about an issue. I can't get jack done as a single member if I don't have the trust of the other voting members. If we can't have the dialogue that needs to be had to move the ball forward, I can have the greatest ideas all day long. It's going to be totally ineffective if I can't effectively work with people. And so that is something that I've learned a ton over these last 4 years now, almost being in office, is how to have those relationships, work together, build that mutual trust. And we've made some serious strides for sure in that department. And I do feel like overall we are working really well together. And actually, Danielle Larkin and I actually are aligned on a lot of things.
That's probably the case on most stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, the city council, truthfully, like the issues are like pretty boring.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Land use.
It's like 70% land use.
Yeah. It's a lot of land use.
Right.
But we got stuck in the last couple of elections. We got stuck in some stuff that just doesn't matter, right? Like the drag queens, that was so masterfully done. The drag queen thing, oh my gosh! Like as
Who would have thought?
As
Little St. George.
Satan's powers go, like that one's where it's like, dude, he's been practicing that one for a while. He rolled that one out and he was like, excellent, right? Like the Mr. Burns. Like it was so perfect for us to get so sidetracked on stuff that has so little to do with it's such a marginal issue with society. And this is something I brought up in St. George word of mouth, people getting upset about a business not doing something that, ideological followers felt like that business should be doing. And it's like we get so caught up in stuff that actually doesn't matter. Right. And so it's been kind of calm, I feel like, over the last probably 3 years, where there hasn't been stuff that's been brought up that's outside of the scope of city council, which allowed you guys to actually put work
Well, and
forward.
Here's the thing is there was a lot of tumultuous, we'll just say, I guess I'll just use that word, tumultuous activities that first year or so that I was in. And, some of that I probably would have, strategically done differently. But I will say in some ways it was actually really good that some of those things did happen, because it's really helped the city moving forward, even though it was like a difficult, bumpy, tumultuous transition in some ways. When it comes to the budget process, when it comes to the truth and taxation issue, and even the drag show, scenario as well, which again, I think was blown up way more than it needed to be as far as like our culture here of being a family-friendly environment. That is important, I think, at all levels of government. But the way that the media, which we all know, if the media can get a headline and the more divisive it is, the bigger it's going to be and the bigger story it is. And so it was unfortunate the way that it got so heavily spun and the false narratives that were out there. None of us on the city level, myself included, have anything against the LGBT community. Like, even though that's how it was painted, right? As, here's these bigots here and they're trying to box this community out. And that's simply just not what it was. It was just, hey, let's all follow the same ordinances across the board.
How do we
right?
use public spaces in the most rational, reasonable way for the vast majority of the people in town?
Right.
And we set rules around that, and then we got to follow the rules. And that's where when excuse me, administrators make mistakes, whether it's through permitting or whether it's the city manager and some processes aren't, executed the way they're written into that legislation, right? There's going to be mistakes made, right? And we're going to always make mistakes. And there's going to be a new one that comes up anytime now, right? Because the election's around the corner. So there'll be a new one that gets spun up. But we've been dwelling on stuff like Dixie Forever, right? It's like the changing of the college. We get so wrapped around that the politicians have to find these specific little ideological tags that they have to adhere to, or they're dead to everybody else. Everything else they have to say is just
these purity tests.
These purity tests, yeah, exactly.
Yep. I know, and I think I may have offended some people. The purity test. I may have offended some people the other day because someone had brought up the flag, the Utah flag issue, and hey, I was not a proponent of the new flag, but my reasoning for not being a proponent of the new flag was simply just a fiscal issue of why are we throwing money into like designing a new flag? Like, what's wrong with our old flag? It wasn't this purity of like, they're coming in and it's
Stealing
woke
our
and
heritage.
they're doing this. Like I can sympathize some who felt that way, but for me, like it wasn't my issue. I mean, I still was in favor of those who wanted to, do the signatures to try to let it go to a vote. Like, great, let that happen. And it failed, But someone the other day was kind of on me about not being vocal about
enough
about the flag. And I'm just like, of all of the issues there are in the world and in the state of Utah and in the city, that's just not even close to the top of my priority list of even what I want my thought process to be on. Like, sorry, it's just not.
And part of me is like, as a local representative, be like, you have state legislators right here. Go yell at them.
Right.
Like I can say all day long to them, and I can yell it out in the public and try to rile up people to push against it. But at the end of the day, the state legislators are the ones that we should be looking to. Is like, what are you guys doing?
Well,
up there?
And our legislators voted against it.
Exactly.
Our local delegation voted against it. Now, on the city level, if it were solely up to me on what flag we hung outside, it would be the original state flag. But it's not currently because it's not solely up to me. Is it worth me going out there and kicking and screaming about? No.
Yeah.
There's so much other issues that are more important.
Well, and then and if I can linger on the Dixie name change, Don Ipson got a lot of heat for voting in favor of the name change, because this is in his words.
I think he actually voted against it.
He voted against it, but then made a change.
Yes.
To allow the Dixie campus to remain. He was trading. He was doing political trading, which is a requirement to operate, right? I think at this stage you've realized, there has to be some kind of trading going on or stuff just doesn't get done. And the ability to change the name later, he was able to keep that in the bill for the ability to change the name. Like if this doesn't work out and Utah Tech becomes a disaster, that they have the option to change it back, right? It wasn't the door closes and then there's no other way to go back to where it was. He traded his vote when he ultimately ended up voting for it was to keep Dixie campus on there, on the sign as part of its heritage, to hold on to that. And then also to be able to, in the future, be able to change it if at all that was possible, if there was some kind of sentiment change, right? And so he traded those things. And then as a politician, you can get beat up for saying, now this purity test is like, well, you should have just said no and then just stood on that and planted your flag. But then you have to work together. That's the whole point of the legislative body. But I still get wrapped up, and I talked to Jordan Hess about this on the episodes a couple episodes ago about like naming Utahns. What was it? The law that like the definition of a citizen of Utah was like a Utahn, and then it had to be spelled a specific way. Wasn't that like one of the bills?
It was like should the word include like H or something, like something so dumb,
something so stupid.
Like that's what we're.
That's
like
one of the
time
things.
on.
It's like that's one of the bills that they're having to go vote on, and it just gets so frustrating that we get caught up in that. But
I'll
so
look
many,
it up real quick.
many legislators we get wrapped around the axle about these non-important issues.
Yeah, well, and I think like I can totally understand the issue as far as the concern of cancel culture, right? Like that's why I was and still am a huge supporter of the name Dixie. Like, great. If it were solely up to me, I'd change it all back to Dixie because I think it was deceptive the way they went about it. They should have just been upfront and honest. So there were a lot of issues there. So I definitely understand that frustration and, concern that it was being painted falsely. It's not a racist term in this area. We all know that, those of us who have been here a long time. So like, I truly sympathize with that. But also I understand that we also have to get the work done and we also have to move forward and keep going. And yeah, sure. If the opportunity comes to repeal it and go back to the name Dixie, great. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's got to be the single purity issue test.
Yeah, we it's one of the things that I'd love to see us get away from is this branding and this idea where politics and the economy go together, which is part of Yuval Levin's book, where we've shifted to where all of a sudden politics has a field in economics where before 1900, because of the income tax, when we started levying income taxes and changing revenue into the government from business, all of a sudden this whole shift comes, right? And Trump's talked a little bit about it, but it's such this difficult thing intertwined now where economics and government are blending together, which the flag is a byproduct of that, right? It's a branding issue, right? So I had Brad Plutho on the episode. He's one of the he's marketing and growth at Intergalactic, but
Chief growth officer or something.
Chief growth officer,
CGO.
something, because they're scaling, right? That business is growing quickly, and he's the one who helped. He led the team that helped rebrand UVU, which for decades UVU was like a community college that was like not important, and now it's grown to be one of the biggest universities.
Utah Valley State College.
Yeah, and now because of that branding, right? We've seen that branding changes, and then in my mind, it was a clear, what can we do at Utah Tech? What they've done at UVU? Can we rebrand it and reach this group to kind of solidify the university as this anchor within Southern Utah? Which, if I just looked at it from that perspective, I'm like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah,
I think that's great. It's great for the community. It's great for educating the younger population here. We want to raise the bar so they get better jobs, right? Better quality student in the local businesses.
More students, better athletics, right? I mean, they've moved up quite a bit in football and basketball, and
which I hate all that stuff.
Conferences and stuff.
But ultimately, it's a branding strategy. But they didn't talk about really. They skewed it in this way that Dixie was negatively hurting it, rather than saying, okay,
as far as recruiting goes.
Yeah, as far as recruiting goes.
Well, they still haven't produced this Cicero report that they claim was like their whole basis for making these decisions, even though the courts have ordered them to release this information.
Yeah, and
which is interesting.
So, but the reality is, like, they're trying to rebrand it so it could be a D1 college that they can grow it and make it similar to what UVU's done. That's what they're trying to do. All the reasons behind it, and whether we feel like that's right or wrong, it doesn't really matter at this point anyway, right? And so, going back to, you are running for re-election at the city council, right?
Is that
this is the very
you don't have to say it. You can say it.
I am publicly saying I am running for re-election.
This is it.
Right here.
You did it
on the 435 podcast.
Wow.
I didn't even plan that out. Sweet. Okay.
I didn't either.
Yeah. Well, so knowing that you have the election coming up, I'm thinking about how do we move forward? When you look forward in the future, we've talked a little bit about the budget, because they're getting ready to release the 26 budget at the local level. Let's take a step up to the state level. When you look at what are the priority issues within the state, have you followed that state politics and the GOP politics portion of it? But what do you see as some things that are drawing your attention? I get lost in federal stuff all the time, so like it's hard for me to follow state too much, because it's easy to get just caught up in what's going on federally. But from your perspective, if you take a macro approach to the state of Utah, what do you think are going to be big issues and conversation pieces over the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, statewide, actually, I am very optimistic. And I know that there's a crowd online right now who are very pessimistic.
Yeah.
But, especially seeing, Rob Axson just got reelected as the GOP chair, which I think is a great thing, a great step in continued trajectory up, because already since he's been in, we've had a positive trajectory. And it's interesting because the narrative out there that people keep saying is, oh, Utah's moved left. But if you actually look at the data, that initial information that was being put out that showed that not as many Utahns voted for Donald Trump this time as last time, that was actually put out early before all the mail-in ballots and all of that were actually tallied. So actually looking at percentages now, that did not go down. It actually went up slightly, the number of people who voted for Donald Trump. And then if you look at the statewide races from last year too, almost every single race, the person who was put in was either about the same in terms of ideology or went more to the right. So I just don't really fall into that narrative of
we're slipping.
Utah's so doomed now. Are there concerns as far as, for instance, this Utah Supreme Court ruling just this last year that now allows ballot initiatives to be law that cannot be amended by our legislator? That's actually very scary, because we are a republic. We are supposed to be a constitutional republic, which means we elect representatives to make those laws and vote on our behalf, right? And obviously they're still held accountable to us, we the people, is ultimately where that power is derived. But if you now shift to this, anyone can go out and run a ballot initiative and our elected representatives can't make any changes to that, that's a little scary. And that's where you've seen in other states, George Soros funded initiatives come in, purposely because they love this. It's easy to brand something and market something to the public to where, like you were saying earlier, a lot of us are busy raising our families, running businesses, working, 9 to 5. Like, we're busy. We don't all have time to do the deep dive on some of these things. And so when we get our ballots in the mail, which is another issue, but when we get our ballots, it's like, it's easy sometimes if something, oh yeah, you mean
a high-speed rail? A high-speed rail to Vegas? Hell yeah.
Yeah, right?
Rack it up.
And then the legislator can't make any changes to that. So there are some concerns too, if we don't really watch that as well. And, hopefully we're able to get something passed. They tried to do it already in a special session, which didn't happen. So it was blocked by the courts. So hopefully we are able to make some changes so that that doesn't occur, because I think that could be a big issue.
And I think looking at how it's affected California ballot initiatives, I've from living there for 10 years, voting in California, the GO bond locally, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, I see where this goes. I've seen in California where there's 6 different bond initiatives on the ballot and they all get passed. It's like, you don't manage the budget. How do I know that we can actually afford this? Just because it's sitting here on this piece of paper saying that we can do it, doesn't mean we can actually do it.
Right.
And it puts us into positions where, is this the most financially and fiscally responsible use of government funds?
Yeah.
And so that's why I was opposed to the Go bond. One of 2 ways. One, I didn't feel like the messaging. I don't have to get into this. I don't think it's up to I think it's a mistake for the mob to be spending tax dollars. That's why we have representatives. That's why most of them are attorneys. That's why, we have the courts to be able to fight these things out. When the legislators pass a bill, we have the courts the ability to challenge those ththings. But if you put this initiative out, so even the courts can't, there's no way in this ballot initiative. Is that what you're saying is the court voted on? Is that if it's a ballot initiative and it becomes law, that's it. We can't change it.
Yep. Our legislator does not have the power. Like, for instance, when
can the governor do something about it?
No. So when the voters decided, for instance, a Medicaid expansion, and that passed, a few years back. Well, budget wise, the legislator had to look and make some changes so that it would make sense in the budget, right?
Yeah.
If that same ballot initiative were to pass now, we would be screwed on the state budget. Because the legislator now, like, their hands are tied by the judicial branch to make those decisions. So
that's
a big problem.
One.
Yeah.
That's a tough one.
But yeah, I mean, speaking of budgets, that's one thing at the city level where we have made some tremendous improvements. So, when I first got in, and I tell this story all the time because I'm new to politics at this point. I had never sat in a budget meeting before, and, I'm just coming from the medical field, and I'm sitting in this meeting and I'm feeling like, why am I sitting in a sales pitch? Like, city staff is up there and they've got this
from the city staff.
And they've got this cup of coffee on the screen. Like, we are going to increase taxes because we want to fund our law enforcement. And there's just no way we can do it. But it's just the cost of a cup of coffee a month to everyone. Everyone can afford that. It's no big deal. And I'm like, whoa. Like, my flags are going up all over the place. Like, actually show me the scenario of not increasing taxes.
Yeah.
And, how do we properly fund our public safety without raising taxes? And I was literally told, when I sat down by someone who's no longer there, that they couldn't present that for me, that this is just the way it is. And there's not going to be any presenting alternative options. And for me, that's an issue because I am elected by the people to represent them.
Yeah.
Not for the unelected bureaucrats to tell me what to do.
Right.
And so it was a little tumultuous. You probably remember during that time, there was a lot of people saying, oh, Michelle Tanner just doesn't want to fund our law enforcement. And, our budget's just going to completely implode and we're going to have to lay people off and it's going to be a big deal.
We're not going to be able to hire police officers and it's going to be effective public safety.
We won't be able to give them their raises, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I called BS on it. I said, no, I don't think that's right. In fact, I think what we need to do is reprioritize the budget. Line item number 1 should be funding our public safety, because if anything's the proper role of government, it's to protect life, liberty, and property, which is exactly what they're doing. So, hey, let's shift some things around in the budget. And then if we get down to some lower priority items that truly we can't fund, well, then maybe we need to go out to the public and ask them if it's worth them raising their taxes to fund the golf course clubhouse remodel or whatever it is, right? That's probably shouldn't be funded over our public safety, right?
The answer is no. Sorry, McCrae. No. The answer is no.
And so it's actually really good, though, that we went through that vigorous process. We had healthy debate. And, it went from that first budget hearing, I was the only one who voted against it, to the second budget hearing. The public showed up. They made their opinion known, and it got voted down 4-1. And I will tell you, since that time, our entire budget process has shifted to where I'm no longer sitting in a sales pitch when I'm sitting there. In fact, we are all coming together collaboratively as a city council, as mayor, as city manager. We have a phenomenal city manager, and we have great staff too. So I don't mean that derogatory by any way when I say unelected bureaucrats. We need them. We need them to execute the will of the people.
Well, we teach people how to do their jobs, right? So if we've taught them, right, for 2 decades that this is how it goes, right? Or let's say 10 years, right? You have bureaucratic individuals at the cities like, we've done it this way for 10 years. Why should we change it? This is like 10 times more difficult, right? And they're going to push back on those things, but we're going to teach them how the process should go. And when there's significant pushback and you got to change it, well, it's painful, but we got to do it.
Yeah. And to their credit, like we made the appropriate changes, and now the process has been great. We are able to sit down. We all talk about what the priorities should be. And then, of course, as a single member, nothing can happen. So as long as at least 3 of us agrees on an item, that gets moved in the agenda, and it's been appropriately prioritized now. And so I've actually been really impressed that, for instance, in this year's budget, which we're just starting to get into, we haven't had the public hearings for that yet. But actually, for the first time, other than COVID, because they did, freeze some funds during COVID, there was some concerns that first year there, which actually ended up, we were booming and not diminishing by any stretch. But yeah, in the last at least 15, 20 years that I went back in budgets a couple of months ago, this is the first time that we have actually decreased the budget from the prior year.
Nice.
So, and yes, a lot of that are new city hall. Some of those projects will be wrapping up, which helped. But there's also some things that make it bigger, because we now have a self-funded health insurance plan. And that gets counted twice in the budget, which I think is somewhere around 14 million. So, you think that gets counted twice, whereas that wasn't getting counted twice before. So there are some other things that,
Why do you mean it gets
bigger.
Counted twice?
Well, because you have the fund itself that has to be counted in the budget, but then also where it's distributed has to be counted as part of the budget too.
Oh, got it.
And so you end up double counting it in terms of the overall total, whereas before, when it was, outsourced, it wasn't.
But generally speaking, though, on the insurance, long term, it's supposed to save more money than.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, our rates were increasing astronomically every year before. And there is still some of that, because now, depending on what the claims are, like there might be one year where there's not a lot of claims and we actually save a lot of money. There might be another year where there's heavier claims and we're paying out more. So it is definitely, an up and down, but overall that trajectory, I believe, will be saving money overall in the long haul. And
I was listening to the working meeting, and they were talking about how, like, okay, in the range, when we project out how many claims, there's going to be expensive years and there's going to be less expensive years. And it seems like we're on the high end of this. This could just be right out of the gate an expensive year based off of what claims came in from the city.
People tripping and falling on public sidewalks and stuff like that.
Cancers, like stuff like that's like expensive stuff. You know what I mean?
Right. So speaking of that, if there's a city employee who, has a cancer claim or something like that, the city is on the hook for that because we're self-insured. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which, going back to the proper role of government, is like, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that. It's like the city managing it the best, where we're not at the mercy of an insurance organization that can raise rates whenever they want, but self-funding it, managing it ourselves is a lot more work. I listened to the whole thing. I was like, oh my gosh. I can't believe they voted
and to be clear, though,
do this.
there is still a third party that oversees it. It's not city staff overseeing it.
Right. Like that helps, like...
facilitate shop, like understand like the ins and outs, the insurance.
Yeah, like we didn't have to hire 17 people to like, look over the numbers
it's still
and stuff.
Select health insurance. Like it's
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks Intermountain. Yeah. So if you want to check out, I got so much to say. I know we can both get started with that freaking monopoly. Okay. If you want to check out, there is a proposed budget online, 2025, 2026 budget proposal online, sgcity.org. And then if you go to departments and city budget, it's right there, city budget. You can see the chart. I got it here. We're not going to dive into it because you haven't adopted. You guys haven't voted on it yet, but the public comment period will happen in June.
Correct.
So if the budget, I know there's a bunch of you budget nerds out there listening to this podcast that are like, ooh, let me get at it.
Well, it's
I
like
can think of 2 or 3
pages long too, right?
Well, it's over 400 pages long. 400 pages. But so here's the
Danielle texted me. She's like, I got to go to she went up to Collab just so she's like, I just need to get my mind. I got to get away so I could get into this and have no distractions. She went up to Collab.
Oh, I've been carrying the 400 and whatever pages around with me everywhere I go the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I will say I have been through every page. Now there is a lot of information, and I would just say to the public, I mean, if there are concerns, like show us what areas you would like to see improved, because every single one of us are willing to listen to the public. Like, I don't know any one of us who doesn't want to hear feedback from the public. Now, these blanket, oh, you guys are just robbing us and constantly raising taxes and, you know, the budget is way too high. Like, okay, show us where
which is interesting because
you would
like
cut.
I always go back to like the police department. I've got a brother-in-law in the police department. I think of the fire department, stuff like that. Like a fire truck is like $1 million, right? And as we grow, we're going to need more fire trucks. Right, so
we'll just stop growing, Jeff. If we just stop growing, we wouldn't have to.
Maybe we should just stop issuing building permits.
Yeah, we should. We don't have any water, Jeff. We're out of water. I don't care what Willie Billings said. He said we have a lot of water. I don't believe him.
Yeah, are we going down that hole? Do we want to go down?
We're not going down that hole. If you look at looking at the tax, I think it's percent of the revenue we're taking in versus what we're spending. Are we spending it in the right things? Some city council members last time during the last election were saying we've had an audit as to how well we're spending it. Like, we have this much money, and are we accounting for every dollar in and dollar out? And we've gotten awards for that. The city does a great job making sure there's the accounting of the money in and money out is really good. But how we spend it is what the issue was and the argument was.
There's no way to audit that.
Well, so here's the thing.
From the people.
Here's the thing is, since that process I told you about with the truth and taxation, when we went through all of that, we have fully funded and exceeded that 5-year public safety plan that they were saying that we could not fund without raising taxes.
Property
that has
taxes,
been fully funded to date. And then some. It's exceeded that amount that we had in that initial thing. And so priority wise, I think that we are in alignment pretty much with where we should be in terms of priorities. Does that mean there's not always room for improvement? I think there's always room for improvement in everything. And so, that's why it's there for the public to see. Now, in terms of auditing, it is a state law that our budget is audited every year because we have to have a balanced budget.
Yeah.
And so, we always pass that with flying colors. Now, one new thing that we are implementing that's part of this new budget
let's go.
is, I'm just calling it like the Doge of St. George City.
I was going to ask this question.
Because it's a government efficiency. Actually, our budget team, which I love Robert, he's over our budget. He does a phenomenal job. Yes.
Army of Robs.
Yes,
the only thing better than one Rob is two,
right? Robs. We got Rob Axson, Rob McFarland, Rob Myers. Yeah, it's great. Robs are great. So, anyway, he is, they are going to do some trainings, go to some of these trainings on government efficiency so that we make sure that we are spending it in the most efficient way that we can, because there's always room for improvement for sure.
Cool. So thinking about, I have the tendency to say, are we looking forward enough? Are we as city officials, are we projecting out far enough ahead, knowing that, okay, we're going to have growth. We can't stop building permits. We can't cut out 20% of our economic driver in construction.
40%.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. The labor and statistics, I did that on, I pulled up the latest labor and statistics. Trades and construction, if you add those two up, it's 29% of our local economy. So trades would say is a part of construction. Construction being this bucket. Construction's 11%. Trades and other things fit in there as 18%. But so maybe, we'll split the difference. Let's say 30%. There's a range. 30% of our economy is driven based off of that growth, that construction, which we have available land. People can do what they want with their private land, right? If I have 10 acres of alfalfa field and I want to turn that into houses, they could do that. That's part of what they're allowed to do is freedom of property, right? They have their own property rights. Does that affect the city in a lot of different ways? Yes, it does. However, do we look at this budget from how can we start looking forward to rainy days, or do we need to put utilities? I was listening to a podcast about Fayetteville, Louisiana, and how
Lafayette.
Fayetteville, Arkansas?
That's Arkansas.
Yeah.
Razorbacks.
Yeah. Lafayette.
If you're from Louisiana, it's Lafayette.
So they didn't prepare for flood stuff, right? And so they built all these new roads and all this affordable housing, and that was like the big banner over, basically from 2012 until 2015. Like that was their big banner. And then this flood came and flooded out all these affordable housing, units and developments, and they didn't have proper flood control. Do you think, I believe that we have a lot of really good people when it comes to managing utilities and things like that. But do we really take a second to look forward and say, what does it look like in 5-10 years? Because I know the general plan, we're just finalizing the 20-year general plan. How has that process been? And where do you find where we're not doing enough at, and where are we doing really good at?
Yeah, I think overall we have been doing a good job there. And one thing that I really appreciate about Robert, for instance, who, does a lot of overseeing this budget, is even this year, as there is some economic uncertainty as far as, the tariffs and some of the other things going on, is, how is this going to affect the economy moving forward? Hopefully it's a positive and not a negative, but he takes the conservative approach. And overall, as a council and as citizens, I think most of us would also agree with that. And so it's reflecting the will of the people of taking that conservative approach is, let's not overextend ourselves for next year and then the economy tanks. Like, let's plan for it, not increasing like we anticipate it probably will, but we're not going to plan the budget as if it's going to, right? And so I think overall we are really good at doing that. And then, looking forward to, there is state law that prohibits the amount to have say a rainy day fund and things like that, which we are in compliance with that and meeting those thresholds. So I think we're in a strong position overall as a city.
Yeah. What do you think we should be planning forward on?
So there will come to a point where, you see right now where, every single stretch of land that possibly can be built on is being built on. And now
St. George, for sure.
And St. George, right. And now it's getting into some of the more difficult areas, right, to build on near hillsides and on top of hills and things like that. And so, there will become a time where we are closer to build out. And like we talked about, like so much of our economy being driven by construction. It's like, what does that look like when this is slowing down, which inevitably will happen at some point. And so I think it's good that we have a diversified economy coming in with, say, Tech Ridge. I'll give Tech Ridge a shout out. I think it's awesome that we have those types of companies and job opportunities here, because there will need to be a transition at some point. There will always be some construction, sure, but not to the extent that we have right now.
So I'm concerned a little bit with energy infrastructure. I feel like I know I've had Lori Mangum, and she ran St. George Power and as a liaison to the city and really helped that utility become one of the better utility systems in Southern Utah and really Utah in general. And she planned out, before she retired, she planned out this 10-year plan to where she could really stabilize those power bills with natural gas and some of these other things. And my concern is the cities around St. George haven't really planned for that. And I can't help but think, is electricity and the usage of electricity on the radar? Is anybody talking about, hey, 5-10 years from now, the energy output nationwide is going to 5x, right? 5 times that. And we don't necessarily have the systems in place on that. Do you hear anybody talking about that, whether it's from the county level or state level, of how, as St. George goes, we're on an island and we're, rolling blackouts and things like that can really impact us, right? Because we run all of the emergency for basically 5 counties around us, right? We have the airport and the tower there, the air traffic control tower there. We're such this like important hub right here in the desert. Has there been any conversations about that? Have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, and I think it's something we always have to be looking at, diversifying, and that's something I know that Lori was really big on, and she did a great job training Brian, who is now over our energy department. And I think even looking at things like small cell nuclear, I know is a really buzzword right now. It's kind of newer, and I know that we haven't fully bought into that yet, but I think that's definitely something that we're going to see more of in the future. And we are fortunate to have Representative Colin Jack
had him
down
on the pod.
here.
Talk to him.
I'm going to have to, man, you guys are having all these podcasts I need to go back and catch up on.
We got some good ones.
Yeah, I love Colin. I think he does a phenomenal job, and we're fortunate to have his expertise with being the engineer in the industry he is.
I think we talked for 2 hours.
He's
we could have
so
just kept
smart.
going and going.
Yeah, but
awesome.
he's been a good job protecting us legislatively to make sure that these coal mines and things are not shutting down. Like, we need this. So, yeah, but I think you're right. I mean, it's certainly something that we always need to be looking into the future and diversifying and assuring that we have proper supply.
Do you think this Trump plan on releasing, the economic resources of BLM land, is that going to come into play here in Washington County?
I need to do a deeper dive on that. Honestly, I know I've been seeing bits and pieces about that. And so I guess I won't really comment too deeply on that, my opinion, because I need to look further into it.
Yeah, I think think about annexation of land, right? It's like we get closer to build out. It's like, we got a lot of BLM land next to Sun River, right?
Well,
that all of a sudden could be part of St. George.
And what I will say on that is some of the criticism I've heard about it, which I'm like scratching my head a little bit, is I would much rather have local control versus federal control. And so I've seen some criticism of, oh, no, we don't want to, take over these federal lands. And I'm like, but you trust the federal government to have control over it? Like,
just
versus
not Trump.
Local control?
They just don't want Trump to have control over it. It's always the opposite person, right? It's like, well, I would let Biden have control over it, but I'm not going to let Trump have control over it, right? And so that's where there's tension there. But I agree with you.
I'd rather see local control. So
right. It's state control, even, like whether it's state control or city control or wherever it is. I think it's going to be an interesting path moving forward over the next 3 years on how that kind of plays out.
Yeah. And I don't want to see, back to the proper role of government is, because I know I got some calls on, there was a news article about St. George potentially getting a piece of that land for, quote, affordable housing or attainable housing. Now, is there a need for more attainable housing? Of course. We do have to be careful, though, in government. I am never a fan of anything in terms of, rent controls, price controls, the city get involved in actually producing these, quote, affordable housing. Like, that is for the free market and the private sector. Government can help by eliminating red tape and letting entrepreneurs and the free market take over and fill that void.
Was there a big debate on the downtown plan? Because zoning, I think, back to the city council being 70% development, right, is like land use and development. In having conversations about the zone changes and things like that, is there a big spectrum of opinions on the city council right now as to what we should do for zoning in the different areas, or how do you guys look at it?
We're not super far apart. I think this is where actually Danielle and I probably align the most in terms of, I am not a fan of restrictions. And, going back to property rights and, love me or hate me for this, I believe that people should be able to do what they want with their own property. Now, there's a balance, and this has been probably one of the more difficult issues for me as a council member in making some of these land use decisions is balancing my libertarianism in that way. And I'm a Republican, but I'm also very libertarian in terms of land use and property rights, is balancing that with, okay, but you also have to assure proper infrastructure, right? You also have to assure there's not a true infringement on somebody else's freedom or somebody else's property rights or a true public safety issue that's going to occur from what they want to do with their property.
Short-term rentals always come up as a big hot button.
Right. And, my opinion on that, I'm sure differs, and I know differs from other council members, because again, I think as a property owner, if I want to live in my property and short-term rent part of my property, that's my right as a property owner. And especially having it be owner occupied, it eliminates a lot of the concerns out there of, noise, disturbance, and nuisance, and all of these things that people worry about. So personally, I don't have a problem with owner occupied short-term rental. But anyway, that's a balancing act. And, I think actually Danielle and I'm not going to speak for her, I guess, but from conversations I've had with her, I think that we actually align a lot on, giving property owners that ability to, in terms of zoning, do what you want with your property, so long as you meet those other requirements.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's been a lot of progress, if I can use that term, progressive opinion on land use in St. George, more so than other cities, right? But St. George can't just do it themselves, right? And affordable housing is, and I've said this a bazillion times, it's so complex, and there's no magical wand that's just going to solve the problem. And most of it is impacted by, pure and simple, the interest rate. Is that it was really affordable to live here in 2015 and 2017 because property values were kind of in a normal space and interest rates weren't super high. Right. And those are the two little functions that make up 60% of affordability, the other being wages. And I think the city and government can do a little bit better in raising the wages for city jobs and government jobs, but they have to do it within their budget, right? And so if they have sound budgetary policy and they can afford to pay the government employees more, I think they should, because that'll help raise the wages across the county and the private sector as well, because the government employs like 40% of our county. Like truthfully, it's like 40% is government jobs.
It's high, yeah. The hospitals are high, the school district, which is part of government.
Yeah, exactly. And city officials and all those other things. And so it's such a huge portion of it is where you raise the wages there. It typically is going to trickle into raising wages for the private industry. But we have to have land that is used for entrepreneurial business creation. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that, especially with Tech Ridge, what they've done out in Desert Color. There's these master plans that I think have done a good job of bringing in new businesses that have allowed to diversify.
Even Fort Pierce Industrial too.
Yeah, Fort Pierce. And it's honestly, I could say on the industrial side of things with the inland port out by the airport, that's a really good ad, because industrial space, there's a big need for it, and we're right on I-15, and now we have an airport that can support shipping stuff out. Industrial manufacturing, those types of jobs, I think are going to be huge over the next 50 years. So anything the city can do to help grow that'll be awesome. What else did we cover? What else did you want to chat about?
Man, I feel like we hit on a lot from like the
drama,
of the RINOs versus the extremists to the state to the city level.
Well, I want to have you back on specifically to talk about your campaign and just how you're going to differentiate from the candidates. And so anybody listening in, we're going to cover. It doesn't happen till late June. It's like June 20th is something like that. Is where they put their name on the line saying they're going to run
6th.
No, the filing is the first week of June.
Yeah, June 2nd to the 6th.
Yeah.
You have to file. 6 is the cutoff.
Okay. So once candidates start
like
filing.
2 weeks.
I know, it's coming up fast.
Wow. Yeah.
So we'll be following the local elections for the big 5 cities in Washington County, interviewing the candidates. So we'd love to have you back on. It'll be a shorter episode. We're going to talk just campaign, like, hey, this is what you stand for. I'm going to ask some survey questions. That way, everybody can go to a single website and say, hey, here are the candidates. This is what they stand on. Here's the interview. Here's a list of questions, so that they can kind of, if they can't make it out to the meet and greets, which they have a ton of those, you're in for a fun summer.
So I have a question on that.
I can't wait.
So since you've publicly announced, congratulations.
Yes,
by the way.
On the 435 podcast.
On the 435 podcast. It's a big announcement.
What's your strategy, like short-term strategy, maybe in the next week or two? Are you going to like hit social media hard? Are you going to get a bunch of signs out? Are you going to do things different maybe than you did last time? What's kind of your thought process there?
It's so...
And I have a reason in asking that question.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's... So I'm actually going to be out of town on a humanitarian trip.
Nice.
Leading up until the filing. So there's not a whole lot I'm going to be able to do before then. But yeah, I'll probably announce on... When does this drop?
Do you
Next
know?
Tuesday?
Tuesday? Okay.
It'll be tomorrow.
So
Sweet.
I'll probably announce on social media. Yeah, either...
We could delay it too if you want.
Oh, no, I don't care. You can put it out whenever. Which, I mean, yeah, I guess where we talked about the convention too, you might want to drop it while it's still kind of relevant.
Semi-fresh.
Right, semi-fresh. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll probably announce on social media maybe when I officially file that first week of June. And I threw out all my campaign signs, so I'm going to have to totally redo all of that. I need to start making phone calls and see where I can put signs and get them designed and all of that. So it'll be interesting because the first time I ran, I didn't know what to expect. I was a no name. Nobody knew who I was. And so I kind of just came out of nowhere. And then, to be the top vote getter in that primary election was like, oh, okay, I guess my message is coming across and my message was so simple. It was just about liberty and freedom. And of course that was fresh during COVID when all of us were so tired of the mandates. And that's what really, spurred me to get involved. And so this time where there's kind of been some distance now since COVID and some of those mandates, I mean, my message hasn't changed in terms of that's still what I'm about is individual freedom and liberty and the proper role of government. But it's the work isn't done yet. We need to continue to move. We've shifted the needle in a really positive direction.
I got a campaign slogan for you. Michelle Tanner, keeping St. George great.
I love it.
You can take it free.
Okay, thank you.
Nice.
I need all the help I can get.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
That was good.
I need all the help I can get. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, what I would say is if people like what I stand for, then yeah, it's going to take all hands on deck. And it'll be really interesting because I am such a person that I'm not afraid to say something, even if it's politically unpopular. I've at times offended the left. I've at times offended the right. I'm not really boxed in. As we started this opener with, I've been painted as a RINO. I've been painted as an extremist, right? Because I'm simply not afraid to say what I believe, and what I think is right is what I'm going to stand on. Principle over popularity. And so that's why I think
that's
this
a good
race
campaign slogan too.
That's good.
So that was actually part of my campaign slogan last time was principle over popularity. And silence in the face of tyranny is dangerous was also one of my campaign slogans as well. Because I don't think we should be afraid to be a voice and, stand on those principles. So I don't know where there's people in both of those camps that I've probably offended in one way or another. I'm hoping that, kind of the middle ground there who is willing to have that open dialogue and wants to continue to see my type of a voice on the city council that I do feel reflects a lot of our community. I'm hoping that we are able to rally together and move forward.
Sweet. Well, Michelle Tanner, St. George City Council, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having an unpopular opinion. Every once in a
Anytime.
while. We always got to have it. City elections coming up this year, November. Mayor and 2 city council seats coming up. Michelle Tanner's running. Let's see who steps up against Michelle Tanner. I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of people raising their hand and being like, oh, yeah, I'll face Michelle.
That's kind of my reason behind asking that.
I was going to
that
rap.
question.
Do it.
Is I think if you, and I don't know anything about campaigning, but if you come out hot and heavy, it's going to weed out a whole bunch of people, because last time when there was
16 or something, like 18
candidates,
I know.
it's just it's completely pointless. And so hopefully some of these people that are thinking about just paying the $50 and being annoying, they see you run and they're like, I'm not even gonna mess with it. And instead maybe we'll have 6 candidates that will have meaningful conversations and debates.
Yeah.
I know. It'll be interesting. I mean, I think it's healthy. I mean, as much as it would be a lot easier and less stress in my life to just run unopposed, I doubt that's going to happen, obviously. But it's okay. It's healthy to have that debate.
I agree. But I do think there's, especially from the last elections, there was probably 6, 7, 8 people that just did it just because
just
they could.
to throw their
And there's
name on
nothing
there.
wrong with that. They can.
Yep.
But
I
It's
can think of one.
America.
I can think of one. He runs every time. He's going to run again. It'll be interesting. All right, guys. Thanks for coming on. We got to wrap.
Yeah, you can wrap.
We'll have a good one. More episodes coming. Enjoy everything we talked about. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell. And follow Michelle Tanner on social media because she says a lot of great stuff. All right, guys. We'll see you out there.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all the social media websites. We love your support. We love the dialogue. We want to continue that going.
Find us at realestate435.com. We'd love to help you find a house here in town or help you get wherever you're going.